let's get started. The concept of using a zero trust architecture in cybersecurity has been around for more than a decade, and its fundamental principle of never trust, always verify sounds straightforward enough. However, there's a lot of noise around zero trust, and it's often generated by vendors promising that their solution is the magic silver bullet to all of your zero trust problems. And this can really muddy the waters, and it becomes a bit of a struggle to work out how to implement it both easily and cost effectively. But it's definitely worth looking at zero trust as a concept because it can prevent malware from entering our networks, give remote workers more protection without unduly impacting productivity, simplify the management of security operations centers with enhanced automation, and extend visibility into potential threats so that it can be remediated both quickly and effectively. In this session, we're going to take a look at some of the components of an organization's zero trust strategies and where the Fortra solutions can assist with part of this. Now, to avoid background noise, we do have you all on mute, but please feel free to use the questions panel to ask any questions as we run through the webinar, and we'll also have a section at the end for any additional questions that you might have. If you think of anything after the webinar, then please drop an email through to nick.hogg, that's Hogg, at fortra.com, and I'll be able to get you the answers that you're looking for. We are recording the webinar, and after the webinar, you will get sent a link to that recording. So a bit of background about myself. My name is Nick Hogg. I'm the Director of Technical Training here at Fortra. I've been with the organisation now for more than 18 years, and I actually spend a lot of my time helping both our customers and our partners understand how they can implement our solutions to address their different infrastructure protection, data security needs, and so on. And I think these days, when we're talking to organizations about their cybersecurity, their requirements fall into three key areas. The first of these is around mitigating these ever-expanding and more sophisticated cybersecurity threats that are coming into the organization from outside of the business, and how do you keep on top of that as the landscape of our environment changes, because we're all going through these digital transformation projects. We're all embracing the cloud and the different services and applications that are in there, and we're really starting to just increase our footprint with this kind of combination of on-premise and cloud infrastructure there. So how do we keep on top of these expanding pieces of infrastructure, and how do we keep pace with these ever-evolving cybersecurity threats that are out there without essentially burning out our cybersecurity teams? The second area of concern is around being able to demonstrate the security posture and the compliance posture of the organization. And this might be, for formal compliance reasons to an external auditor, for PCI, GDPR, and so on. But it's also, being able to demonstrate that security posture internally to the executives, because they want that confidence that we're minimizing the risk and we're not going to have that, data loss event or that compliance event that can really impact the bottom line and damage the reputation of the organization, or they're concerned that we might have some kind of cybersecurity event that could be, potentially impacting our ability just to function on a day-to-day basis from there. It's also increasingly this ability to demonstrate that we've got good security best practices and compliance best practices implemented to our business partners and our customers, because we see more focus and more talk now around supply chain risk and third-party risk. So there is more of a focus on organizations and being able to demonstrate that they've got the good sets of security and compliance controls in place to the customers and to the business partners. And how do you do this while kind of maintaining, without that pushing the operational overhead up and really just increasing the demands on some already very busy teams? And that kind of leads into that third point there of we're all being asked to do much more with far fewer resources. So organizations that we're talking to are looking for ways where they can reduce that operational overhead on their busy security and compliance teams, but also reduce the the friction in the organization and the end users to ensure that they're able to go about their legitimate day-to-day business processes, and you're not throwing these kind of unnecessary barriers in their day-to-day operations. And I really like this zero trust framework because at a high level, it really just teaches us to never trust and always verify. So we're essentially requiring users to be authenticated, authorized, and continuously validated for their security configuration and their posture before we grant them access to applications and data. But this is an ongoing process to ensure that we're still validating that it's still the same person and the security posture is still in the same place to give them that ongoing access to these applications and data. Now, when we look at zero trust on the web, there are a ton of different models. It's the 5 pillars, the 6 pillars, the 7, 9 pillars, or whatever. So it can further muddy the waters. I really like this zero trust maturity model here because it gives us 5 easy to kind of understand and group distinct pillars around our security requirements. And with these 5 pillars at a high level, and we'll drill into each one of these in more detail now and look at how the Fortra solutions map against those. But at a high level, we've got this identity pillar, which is describing each unique user or entity that is connecting to our environment and our applications and our resources, and how they're going to authenticate to those resources. With the devices side of things, it's about looking at the devices that are connecting to our infrastructure, validating their security posture, so we're ensuring that they're not bringing additional risks into that environment, and wrapping additional security controls around that to understand if there's any potential loopholes an attacker could take advantage of. And we can do the same thing at the network level. We can identify and manage connectivity into our hardwire or wireless environments linking out to the internet, but we can also look at those network data flows to make sure that there is no potential malicious risks coming into the organization in the form of ransomware and spyware and so on. With the applications and the workload side of things, it's recognizing that we're exposing more and more of our applications to the outside world with web apps and so on, but we're also bringing more applications into the environment, either through third parties, hosting them for us, or software that we're deploying within the environment. And all of these applications can have potential vulnerabilities, both today, but also tomorrow if there's a new vulnerability discovered and emerges in the wild. So with the applications and workload side of things, it's about being proactive, about identifying where there are potential vulnerabilities in these applications that an attacker can take advantage of, so that we can prioritize our remediation steps to address those vulnerabilities. And it's how we can dig into that to test our thinking with things like pen testing and red teaming as well. And then the final pillar here is around the data side of things. And this is where we can inventory, classify, and control access to and where sensitive data can be stored in our environment. But it's also how do we wrap some of those secure collaboration mechanisms around that data so that even once it's outside of the traditional organizational boundary, we're still able to exert control over that sensitive information. Now, each of these 5 pillars contains a lot of individual components, and I'm not going to profess to be an expert in all of these, but what I am going to do in the next few slides is really focus on each of these elements where I know Fortra has solutions that can assist with this. And as we step through this, you'll actually see that there are a host of Fortra solutions that can feed into this larger zero trust story here. So we're going to start off with the identity side of things. And as I kind of just touched on, this is really around addressing each unique user or entity and how they're going to connect to and authenticate to our environment. And that can cover a range of controls from user inventory, multi-factor authentication, privileged access management, all the way through to kind of integrated identity, credential, and access management systems that will give us that visibility and that assurance the right person is accessing the right information at the right time for the right reason. But rather than touching on a software or hardware control to start with, I'm actually going to talk about security awareness training because I'm a big believer in this kind of people processing technology balance when it comes to implementing any kind of cybersecurity, data security solution. And with the people side of things, we can use security awareness training to ensure that the users are educated about the risks that are out there, and we can use that same security awareness training to ensure that those same users are educated about the data security and the compliance concerns that they need to take account of when they're accessing, storing, and handling sensitive data. Now, with Fortra's Terra Nova security solution, we're essentially giving you access to a very broad platform of security awareness training modules that cover everything from phishing awareness all the way through data security and compliance concerns. And what I really like about this, set of security awareness training modules is we can hook into your organizational directory, we can pull down people's job roles, regional units, and so on. And you can use that information to essentially pick and choose from this library of modules to ensure that you're delivering very targeted and tailored training to the end users to make it as relevant to their job roles and as effective as possible. So how do we do that? Well, alongside all of the kind of standard training modules for phishing awareness, password security best practices, data security best practices, we've also got specific modules that can be targeted at people's job roles. So if you have some internal developers who you want to target with secure development training alongside all of the more standard training modules, then we can allocate those modules to that group of users. If you have your C-level executives and you want to give them more specific training modules around the types of threats and risks that a C-level executive or an HR professional or somebody in the finance team would see, then you can very quickly build out these different learning paths within the security awareness training program to ensure that the training you're delivering to the users is as targeted to the job roles as possible, in order to ensure that you're using relevant examples as opposed to generic training, and then that is much more likely to be effective here. And we recognise that organisations have offices all around the world, so we have localised our training into more than 40 different languages, so you can ensure that the training is delivered in a user's first language to make sure that it is as effective as possible for that user. So security awareness training gives us that good foundation when it comes to the identity side of things, because already the users have that good line of baseline of understanding about some of the risks that are out there and some of the concerns when they're accessing sensitive systems and data and how they should handle that. But training will only ever go so far, and people do make mistakes, especially when they're busy and under pressure and tired. So we can back up the security awareness training with the infrastructure and the data security controls to ensure that if a user does make a mistake, or if they don't follow the policies and procedures that you've set out, then we have these electronic backstops in place. And some of these electronic backstops are things like our identity and access management solutions, our core IGA and our box solutions. These allow you to control who's got access to your network and their applications within there, both the on-premise applications and the cloud applications. And it's not just about granting them access to the application. You can also use these solutions to get ready visibility of the permissions that those users have, so that you can ensure that they've got the right permissions for their job role. And what I typically see within organizations is we're very good at the onboarding process. When somebody joins the company, we're very good in ensuring that they've got the right permissions for their job role. When they resign and leave the company, we're very good at closing off their access to all of the systems and applications that they no longer should have access to. But it's that bit in between where people are moving between teams, they're moving between projects, they get promotions and so on, where we sometimes it falls through the cracks. So what eventually happens is, over the course of a number of years, people pick up more and more permissions and they never lose any permissions. Now, the risk here is that if somebody were to compromise that user's account, maybe they successfully hit them with a phishing email and get their login credentials for your environment, then that user has potentially got access to more systems and applications and data than they need to do their job, which then means that that attacker who's now compromised that account has more access than they need to have. So with our core IGA and box solutions, these give you that visibility of the systems, the applications that the users have access to. They give you ready visibility of the permissions that they've got at that point in time. And it's very easy for you to change that permissions as the administrator, as the security officer, so that you can ensure that they've got the right permissions for their job role. But throwing unnecessary or restrictive barriers in the ways that the users can generate a little bit of friction and pushback from the organization. So you also get the ability to delegate some of the permissions to maybe people's business managers, or team managers and so on. So what that allows you to do is you can offload some of the day-to-day operational management onto somebody's line of business manager, and then as they get chopped onto a new project, as they pick up more responsibility, that manager can ensure that they've got the right permissions for their job role, but then yourself and the security of the compliance team can ensure that the manager has made the right decisions and they've not over allocated permissions or forgotten to remove permissions that they should have. So that identity and access management piece really allows you to look not just at the Windows infrastructure, but all of the other PCs of on-premise and cloud applications and web applications that the users have access to, get that ready visibility into what people have access to and what they can do within there, and very rapidly ensure that you are right sizing the permissions for their job roles. The other piece we have is our Zero Trust Network Access solution. And you'll hear me talk about our Digital Guardian Secure Service Edge on a few of the slides here, because that incorporates a number of pieces of functionality. But what we find is more and more, we are either exposing our internal applications to the outside world because we've got remote workers who are logging into the systems, or we're making use of cloud-based applications. Now, the Zero Trust Network Access piece really allows you to wrap an additional layer of validation and verification around these different applications. So good example here, I was talking to a credit card provider in North America. They've got their on-premise customer relationship management system. They've made that available as a web portal that's accessible from outside of the organization because they've got a lot of remote workers, and their security officer has been encouraged to support a bring your own device policy. Now, the concern for him is, well, they don't manage the individual devices, the laptops or um, the tablets that somebody could be using to access this CRM system. So they want to have an additional layer of protection there that says, well, if a user is coming in on one of the corporate managed devices where they've got the endpoint agent in place, then that Zero Trust Network Access system can give that user access to the appropriate system, and that user can do what they should be able to do within the system. They can add a new customer, they can go into an existing customer record and download information out of that. If that same user using the same credentials was to access that system on a personal device, an unmanaged device, well, do they want to give them access to the system? And if they are giving them access to the system, maybe they want to control what that user can do. So maybe they can log in there on a personal tablet. They can add a new customer into the CRM system, so they're uploading the sensitive data into the system, but they don't want them to be able to download the PII, the PCI data of one of the existing customers onto that unmanaged device. So this Zero Trust Network Access gives you that ability to sit in front of both the on-premise applications but also the cloud applications and ensure that only the appropriate people have access to those applications using the correct devices, and you can control what they can do within there. And one of the nice pieces about this is you can also monitor the accounts that are being used to log in to identify where there's potentially a compromised account. So if Nick logs in from Reading in the UK, at 20 past 10 in the morning, and then 1 minute later the same credentials are used to log in from half a world away, then that's indicative that we have a compromised account here. So let's lock that account down until the security team, the compliance team, can take the appropriate steps to mitigate the risk within there. So those three pieces, our Terra Nova security awareness training platform, our core IGA and box identity and access management solutions, and our Digital Guardian secure service edge, zero trust network access controls, are where Fortra can assist with the identity side of things of the zero trust framework. The next piece we have is the devices side of things, and you can see here that clearly there's a lot of places where Fortra can help here, but at a high level, the devices pillar is really around looking at the tracking and the management of any devices and assets that are connecting to our network. And that's not just the on-premise environment, that's also our cloud applications and our cloud services as well. And we've got a number of controls here, such as security configuration management, extended detection response that can be used to ensure proactively that the devices connected into the environment have the right security profiles, or can be used to identify where there's potentially malicious activity that would indicate that there's an attacker within the environment, so that we can close that off before that can escalate into a full data loss or a compliance event or an interruption to critical business services. But we've also got a host of our infrastructure protection controls like vulnerability management, pen testing, and our red teaming controls that allow you to validate your thinking to ensure that those controls that you have in place are going to be as effective as possible and that you don't have any unknown risks within the organization. So let's look at each one of these controls. And to start off, we've got our Tripwire solution, which covers security configuration management and file integrity monitoring. I really like the Tripwire solution because it allows you to do two things. The first piece with security configuration management is that allows you to inventory all of the devices that are connecting into your environment, and you can inventory the applications, the software, the operating systems running in those environments to identify where there's potential security risks there. And with the security configuration management solution, what you can do is you can actually target various compliance mandates like the GDPRs, the PCIs of the world, or you can target security frameworks like NIST and CIS. You can go off, you can do that scan of your environment, and you can see where you've got devices that are out of alignment with those pieces of compliance controls or security best practice frameworks. And that's very effective at starting to target some of your remediation efforts, because you can understand, well, hey, we've got PCI audits coming up in 6 months' time. These endpoints, these applications are out of alignment. We need to bring them back into alignment. And you can run these scans on a regular, repeatable basis, so you can start to identify where there's drift, because that standard build for a new laptop, for a new joiner, that was absolutely in alignment with PCI 6 months ago, over time may have started to drift out of alignment. So you can identify where that drift is in place, so you can tell the IT team that they need to update that standard build and bring that back into alignment. So those regular scans mean that when it comes time for that annual compliance audit, there aren't any kind of nasty surprises. They're either going to have you running around with your hair on fire for a month, doing lots of work to bring yourself back into alignment, or you're not going to fail an audit and then have to go back through that recertification process in the future. So security configuration management ensures that those devices that are going to connect to your environment have the right security profiles, and they're not going to bring unknown, unidentified risks into the environment. The next part of Tripwire is the file integrity monitoring piece. And again, this file integrity monitoring piece is really effective because this gives you the ability to monitor the files within your infrastructure and identify where there are changes in real time and identify who's making those changes and what's making those changes and what those changes are. Now, how is this useful to me? Well, it can be useful from a number of purposes. Firstly, it could, identify those maybe benign risks within the organization that are introduced by your own users. So maybe you've got people in the IT teams or web teams or whatever who are making unauthorized changes to applications and servers within the environment. Well, file integrity monitoring can essentially hook into your change control systems to identify where one of your users is making a change with the best of intentions, but they maybe haven't gone through that change management process that would identify where you're going to bring an unnecessary risk into the environment. So you can identify where the well-intentioned users are potentially bringing risks into the environment, but equally you can identify where there's potentially malicious activity within the environment. So you could see maybe where maybe you've got an attacker with the environment who's quietly collating sensitive data to exfiltrate it out of the organization, or you could potentially identify where people are making changes to files. And that could be useful to you from compliance purposes like PCI and so on, where you've got to demonstrate that you're able to validate the integrity of the data within there. But it can also be useful because it could be an indicator that somebody's trying to make changes to log files to cover their tracks, and maybe that's an attacker who's been who has tried to exfiltrate data out of the organization and they're trying to cover their tracks within there. So that file integrity monitoring piece gives you that ability to not just identify those well-intentioned insiders that bring these unwitting risks into the organization, but it also identifies where there's potentially malicious activity within there. Now, we can go a step further in helping here with our alert logic, expert-enabled extended detection and response solution. This allows us to sit both the endpoints within the environment, and as you'll see in the next slide, into the network layer as well, and identify where there's potentially malicious activity within the environment. Now, the nice thing about the Alert Logic XDR solution is that is backed up by our team of expert security analysts 24/7. So we're able to essentially become an extension of your security team, and we can use our security operations center to potentially identify where there's malicious activity within the environment and either proactively take some steps to close that off. So maybe we identify that there's a compromised cloud account within your AWS infrastructure. We can automatically lock that cloud account down before notifying you of these risks, or we potentially can identify what looks like it might be an attacker who's in the reconnaissance phase within your environment. They haven't yet done anything malicious and disruptive. They haven't yet stolen any of your sensitive data. So we can make you aware that they're within there, and we can give you those best practice recommendations to mitigate that risk in the cleanest and the quickest way possible there. So between the security configuration management, you can ensure that the devices connecting into the environment meet the appropriate security profiles and they're not bringing unnecessary risks in there. And then between the file integrity monitoring and the expert-enabled XDR solutions, you're able to identify where there's potentially an attacker, there's potentially ransomware within the environment, so that we can proactively take the steps to close that off before it can escalate into a full ransomware event or data loss event for us. And these solutions are incredibly powerful, but I think it's always important to look at the solutions we have in place through a different lens and validate what we've got there. And we can use our infrastructure protection solutions to do that. So the vulnerability management solutions, the Fortra VM solution here can scan your on-premise infrastructure, it can scan your web infrastructure, your cloud infrastructure, your web applications, and your software to identify where there are potential vulnerabilities within the environment. And because we are backed by a team of threat intel analysts, because we have hundreds of threat feeds coming into the organization, we've essentially built what we talk about as the Fortra threat brain. The great thing about the Fortra threat brain is it plugs into so many of our solutions, and one of these is our Fortra VM solution. What that allows us to do is identify in real time new and emergent risks that are targeting our customers' infrastructure. So with the Fortra VM solution, we're able to take advantage of this threat intel and map that on to the results of these vulnerability management scans so that we can ensure that we're escalating to you those threats that pose the greatest risk to your organization today. And talking to our customers, this is one of the great values here, because that means that they can target their limited resources on mitigating the greatest threats to the organization, so they see the best return of investment there. So that Fortra VM solution is a great first step, because that allows you to identify these potential vulnerabilities within the environment. But actually, you can go a step further than that. You can take the results of one of these vulnerability management scans, you can import that into our penetration testing tool, our core impact pen testing tool, and you can use the automation within there. You can use our library of up-to-date exploits to test against this list of potential vulnerabilities to see which one of these is potentially exploitable by an attacker. And what we recognize is that penetration testing is very in demand these days, and more organizations are wanting to bring the pen testing capabilities in-house, but recruiting the appropriately skilled pen testers and retaining them is potentially a challenging task. So one of the things we've done with our core impact pen testing solution is made it as easy to use for a novice pen tester as possible. So they can start to take advantage of the automation, they can start to take advantage of this certified exploit library to test against these exploits that are up to date, so they can deliver actionable insights to you from day one to identify these potential vulnerabilities within the environment. And then as they become more experienced, or as you introduce more experienced pen testers into the environment, they can use all the depths of power within the core impact tool to really dig into some of the deeper risks within your infrastructure. And then they can use the automation capabilities to automate a lot of the more standard repetitive pen tests. So you can essentially still get that visibility of where the web team have introduced a new vulnerability when they've made a change overnight, but you're not having to deploy a lot of manpower in order to manually perform these pen tests. So you can free those pen testers up to identify some of those deeper risks within the organization. And again, there's a stage further you can go, because we have our Cobalt Strike and Outflank security tooling red teaming tools. And these essentially allow you to use a very powerful tool set that allows you to conduct attacks against the organization using the same tools and techniques as the attackers. And this can be useful from two levels. Firstly, it allows you to demonstrate the impact on the organization, because if you go back into the executive level and show them a vulnerability management scan of tens of thousands of potential vulnerabilities, they're just going to look at that in slight bemusement and like, well, okay, why do we care? What's the risk to the business? If you can do a red team engagement where you can potentially exfiltrate intellectual property or customer data out of the organization, or you can get to critical systems that you could potentially drop to interrupt business continuity, then you can go back into that same set of non-technical executives to say, well, look, our red team was able to steal the customer database and they got that out of the environment. Is that a level of risk that you're happy living with? So that can demonstrate the potential impact to the organization, and that typically helps to get the buy-in at the executive level for the additional funding and the prioritization to mitigate those risks. The second level of what the red teaming tools gives you is it gives you the ability to capture that red team engagement at a step-by-step level. So you can use that to go back into the organization, and you can work with the blue teams, with the internal security teams, to use the results of this red team engagement as an educational exercise. So you can show them how the attackers were able to get into the environment, how they were able to remain undetected, and how they were able to exfiltrate that sensitive data out of the organization. And that really helps them to understand how they need to change some of their policies and processes to close some of the risks down, or maybe where they need to introduce new applications and new security controls to close off gaps within the defenses. So between the security configuration management, the file integrity monitoring, and the expert-enabled XDR solutions, you can ensure that you're reducing the risks of attacks coming into the organization, and you can ensure that you're reducing the potential impact of those attacks. But also with vulnerability management, pen testing, the red teaming tools, that gives you that way to essentially validate your thinking so that you don't have any kind of hidden risks within the environment that an attacker could take advantage of. And then you can patch those out so you can mitigate those risks before they're able to do that. The next piece we have is the network side of things, and there's a host of controls we can put in here to look at, data flow mapping and segmentation, microsegmentation, to ensure that even if, an attacker gets into the environment, they're not able to get access to everything within that environment. But we can also put some proactive controls in place here to potentially mitigate any threats coming into the organization. And again, Fortra's got a number of solutions that can help here. Now, on the email security side of things, we have our Agari, our Cloud Email Protection, our ClearSwift, and our PhishLab solutions that can all start to deal with some of the inbound risks. And some of that might be around the sophisticated phishing mails that are making it past your existing email security defenses today and into your employees' mailboxes that could be trying to trick your users into voluntarily sharing, their Microsoft 365 login credentials, their Slack login credentials, and so on. So we can plug in at the mailbox level with our cloud email protection solution, and we can use our AI and machine learning models to essentially build up what your legitimate traffic patterns look like, so that if you do get that attacker who's masquerading as a business partner, who's masquerading as a Microsoft 365 password reset, then we can ensure that we can strip that out of the mailbox before it gets in the hands of your users, even if it's made it past multiple layers of other email security defenses that you've got in play. So that can really start to reduce some of the risks of these phishing threats coming into the organization. And I think that's very important, because when you look at the attacks against organizations, around about 90% of those attacks start with a simple phishing email. And the attackers understand what the existing email security defenses look like today. If I go and I talk to our outflank security team who do these high-end red team engagements, if they see that a customer is using Office 365, they've got a whole host of packages that they can use to embed payloads into harmless looking Office documents, into image files that they know will quite happily sail through the Microsoft 365 defenses. So it's important to look at where you can supplement and complement these defenses by plugging it at the mailbox level, by dropping into the mail flow to ensure that you're looking for those sophisticated phishing emails, you're looking for those payloads and what looks like a harmless looking Office document, and you're mitigating, you're stripping out those risks before they get through to the end users, because those are the ways that it would give the attackers the potential foothold into the environment that would then escalate into this interruption of critical business services or this loss of sensitive data. Our digital risk protection solutions actually allow you to extend your protection outside of the corporate network, because traditional security controls are all around, let's look within the infrastructure at the activity happening within here. Let's look at the inbound data flows like email and so on. But actually, Fish Labs, we have an extensive set of crawling mechanisms backed up by our team of security analysts who can essentially crawl the internet, crawl social media, crawl the dark web to start to identify where there are potential threats against your organization. Now, that could be used by organizations like, maybe a bank. You're concerned about attackers sending phishing emails to your customers. Well, our Fish Labs digital risk protection solution can crawl the internet. It can look for the malicious web infrastructure that's been stood up to send these phishing emails. It can be looking for the dummy landing pages that are going to capture the login credentials, and we can use our relationships with the platform holders to get those pieces of infrastructure stripped offline before the attacker's campaign can really kick into gear. Now, that's not just useful if you're a bank and you're worried about your customers getting phished, because again, you can ensure that your own employees aren't getting phished by somebody who's masquerading as the CEO and trying to ask one of the employees to do something, volunteer login credentials or share sensitive information within there. But actually, digital risk protection goes much more than email phishing awareness. We can also crawl the web looking for social media accounts that are masquerading as your executives and so on. We can crawl the web looking for potentially dumps of your employees' Microsoft 365 credentials on the dark web and make you aware of that, because that could be a good indicator that somebody has harvested these credentials of your employees and they're being made available for sale, so that an attacker can potentially use those to get that foothold into the environment. So those digital risk protection solutions allow us to proactively identify where there's information out there that could be used to attack your environment, or we can identify where your sensitive customer information, your intellectual property, has turned up in the web. And then that's maybe an indicator to you that you have had a previously unknown incident within the environment where the attackers were able to exfiltrate that data out of the organization. So it means you can go back with a fine-tooth comb through your environment to understand if you still have a vulnerability, if you still have a risk within your infrastructure. More and more, we are exposing our critical applications to the outside world, customer relationship management systems, employee HR systems, payroll systems, and so on. And we have remote workers, and we're encouraged to support these bring your own device policies. So users might come in on a managed device, but equally they could log in with their personal credentials to that HR portal, that payroll portal that's exposed to the outside world. Equally, an attacker could be scanning your infrastructure and they could identify where you've got that web application and where there's potential vulnerabilities within there. So our web application scanning solution within Fortra VM allows you to be proactive about these risks. You can scan your web apps against things like the OWASP top 10, and we can start to identify where there's cross-site scripting vulnerabilities, where there's potential for password brute forcing or SQL injection, so you can make your own internal teams or the third-party organization who's providing these web applications to you aware of the risks so that they can be patched out and dealt with in a timely manner. But dealing with those risks, especially if there's a new vulnerability in the wild like Log4j, can take time, and that exposes you to escalated risk. So you can put things like our Alert Logic managed web application firewall in front of these web applications along with the rest of your web infrastructure, and you can use that web application firewall to provide essentially an additional layer of protection against the known existing risks like password brute forcing, I guess the common things like SQL injection and cross-site scripting. But importantly, because we manage the web application firewalls for so many of our customers, we can get early visibility into new and emerging attacks and new vulnerabilities that are out there in the wild. Because we back our solutions with this Fortra threat brain that again uses all these hundreds of threat feeds and uses our teams of threat analysts to identify new vulnerabilities and attacks. Again, this is all proactively feeding into the web application firewall to ensure that we're able to deploy these virtual patches in front of your web applications and your web infrastructure even before an attacker has had the chance to take advantage of and target that vulnerability. And that allows you to really mitigate the risks of these servers and applications that you're exposing to the outside world, gives you that breathing space that then allows you to go off and deploy the patches, patch out the risks at a more reasoned pace where you're not having to take critical services offline until you've mitigated that threat. It's also useful if you've got legacy infrastructure that's exposed to the outside world. So a good example is a utilities provider that I dealt with recently. They had bought another utilities provider as part of their acquisition strategy, and they very quickly identified that the customer relationship management system there that had a web portal that customers could log into to update their meter readings and provide get visibility of their billing, that had a whole host of vulnerabilities. And because it was sitting on an out-of-date operating system, because some of the third-party applications that were in the background were no longer supported, then that was bringing an undue amount of risk into the organization. But to take that system offline would have been particularly damaging to them in terms of the customer relationship side of things. So they could use the web application firewall to essentially deploy these virtual patches in front of this web application, and then that essentially bought them 6 months to migrate the customers from the acquired company onto their their known and trusted CRM system that didn't have these same legacy vulnerabilities there. So that web application firewall piece can be very good at proactively identifying the risks and mitigating them for your existing up-to-date infrastructure, but it's also useful there for dealing with some of the legacy risks within the environment while you look at how you transition off these legacy platforms and applications. Our web gateway, it can be used to ensure that your users aren't going to inappropriate websites, and importantly, they're not bringing that ransomware spyware into the organization. Now, web gateways have been around for decades. The nice thing about our web gateway is it gives you that ability to support your remote workforces, because more and more we're dealing with remote employees whose web traffic isn't going through the corporate VPN and the corporate infrastructure. So we need the ability to hook into that web traffic even once they're off the VPN. So with our web gateway, we can pick up the traffic from the employees. We can ensure that they're only going to the appropriate websites. We can ensure that they're not going to download the malware, the spyware, the ransomware onto their device that they could then jump onto the corporate network at a later date. And importantly, you can control what they're doing with sensitive data here as well. And we'll touch on some of the additional controls on the next slide when we talk about the data side of it, in 2 slides time, in fact. And again, the managed, the expert-enabled extended detection response side of things gives you that ability to plug in at the network layer, because we don't just integrate at the endpoint, we can integrate with your existing network infrastructure, both on-premise, but also in the cloud, into the likes of the AWSs, the Azures, and so on. And we can identify where there's potentially malicious activity that again would indicate that there's an attacker in your on-premise environment who's just in that reconnaissance phase, or again where there's potentially that compromised AWS account in the cloud, so we can lock that off proactively before the attacker can take advantage of that and get to sensitive data or systems and exfiltrate that out of the environment. So those hosts of controls can help to ensure that you're mitigating some of the inbound risks and your network data flows, but they can also ensure that you're potentially putting proactive controls in front of your web infrastructure or your web applications. And again, you're looking at the network traffic and the cloud traffic to ensure that there's no malicious activity going on, so you can close that off. The next piece, the fourth pillar, is around applications and workloads. And again, we've got these solutions that we've talked about before who can allow you to proactively identify vulnerabilities within the applications that you've got, both on-premise and in the cloud, and mitigate those vulnerabilities. And those aren't just applications that you are building yourself internally, because as organizations, we bring so many third-party pieces of software into the environment and install it in the endpoints and the servers and so on. But again, we've got the third-party applications that come through other organizations that are hosting our applications or hosting our services for us. So with the vulnerability management, we give you that single point where you can scan the on-premise applications, the on-premise software, and the cloud and the web applications, and you can get that consistent set of visibility of the potential risks. And again, we prioritize that so you understand where the greatest threats are, both on-premise and in the cloud, so you can target those remediation testing capabilities. With our application security testing piece, those are our B-Storm solutions and so on that allow you to analyze applications at runtime, so we don't need access to the source code. So it could be that there's a new vulnerability out in the wild and you want to become aware of potential risks with third-party software that you've got within the environment. Well, you can use our B-Storm solution to scan that software to identify where you have applications that are vulnerable to this risk, and then talk to the third-party vendors about getting a fix issued, or talk to your internal teams who are developing software about getting that risk mitigated in a timely manner. Again, with vulnerability management and application security testing, that gives you the ability to identify where there are potential risks so you can be proactive about dealing with those. When you've put the fixes in place, I think it's always useful to test those fixes with things like the pen testing and the red teaming to identify where there are still risks within the environment. And again, the pen testing core impact tool or our red teaming tools such as Cobalt Strike and Outflank security tooling give you that way to validate the tests, validate the fixes, and validate the critical thinking of the security and the compliance teams to ensure that there's no vulnerabilities that an attacker could take advantage of. And again, the zero trust network access piece that we talked about back at the user side of things gives us this additional set of controls, because that gives you the ability to identify where you've got a user coming in from a managed device versus an unmanaged device to one of your on-premise applications that's been exposed to the outside world, like that CRM system for the credit cards company I was dealing with previously, or HR payroll systems that come up so frequently in conversations that are exposed to the outside world, to ensure that user can only access those systems using the appropriate devices, unmanaged versus managed, and you can control what they can do, what they can download, what they can upload, what they can do within there. And that's not just for the on-premise applications. That gives you the ability to extend that detection to your cloud applications coming from third-party vendors as well. And again, that gives you the ability to identify where you've got an unauthorized user trying to access sensitive applications, or you've got compromised accounts, so you can mitigate the risk within there. And then the fifth pillar, the data pillar, gives us a number of controls which allow us to understand what sensitive data we've got within the environment and where it's being stored today on premise and the cloud, who's got access to that data, and how it's been shared both internally and externally. And again, I'm going to talk about the security awareness training piece from Terra Nova, because that doesn't just cover, phishing simulation and phishing awareness. It covers a whole host of data security modules. It covers a range of compliance training modules there. So you can ensure that your users have a good baseline understanding about what data is sensitive and how it should be handled and how it should be stored and how it should be shared. But again, people will make mistakes, so you need to make sure that you've got the electronic backstops in place. And that's where the data classification comes into play, because that allows you to identify the sensitive data within the environment. And by identifying what's sensitive to the organization and differentiating that from the less sensitive data, you can make sure that you're wrapping the appropriate security controls around the appropriate sensitive information, but critically, you're not becoming unnecessary barrier to the legitimate day-to-day operations of your users with the less sensitive information, and you're not generating a whole host of false positives that's just generating a huge amount of workload for your security and your compliance teams. So the data classification solutions, our Fortra data classification suite, allows you to identify what your sensitive data is, And then you can use our Digital Guardian data loss prevention solution to deploy at the endpoint, in the network flows, and importantly, into the cloud to identify where that sensitive data lives today and who's got access to it and how it's been shared both internally and externally, and the mechanisms that are being used to share that data. And then you can use the insights that you gain from that to put in place a policy that's aligned with the business processes. So you can ensure that you're protecting the important information, but you're not getting in the way of the important business processes that absolutely need to happen. So that person in HR who does need to be able to export the employee information out of the CRM system into an Excel spreadsheet and then upload that Excel spreadsheet once a month into the third-party payroll vendors website. Well, they need to be able to do that, so you don't want to get in the way of that, but you do want to stop them from saving that data into a more accessible network share than it should be, or sharing that with a coworker but accidentally clicking the wrong name in an Outlook autocomplete and sending that to the wrong coworker, or saving that into a personal Dropbox folder and then having that synced out to the cloud. So our Digital Guardian DLP solution gives you a very configurable set of security controls that ensure that you're putting the appropriate policies in place to protect sensitive information, but you don't become that unnecessary barrier to legitimate day-to-day business processes. And not all of the data flows around sensitive data will go through the corporate environment, because we host our CRM system in something like a Salesforce, or we use Marketo to talk to the customers, and our users don't necessarily go through the on-premise infrastructure or the VPN when they're accessing these systems. They've got the login credentials that allow them to go to that web application from a personal device. So our cloud access security broker essentially allows you to plug into this this cloud traffic to ensure that you've got full visibility of what sensitive data you've got living in the cloud. You've got the ability to understand who's accessing the data, and you've got the ability to control what they can do with that data. So if I log into our Salesforce system using my work laptop that's got the endpoint agent in place, then my IT team can give me full abilities to go in there, update records, download sensitive data, do whatever I like. If I use the same login credentials to log in from my iPad, which is an unmanaged device, then potentially they're not going to allow me to have any access. Or in the example of, maybe that credit card organization, maybe we'll allow somebody to log in from an unmanaged device and add a new customer, but we're not going to be able to download any existing customer data that would contain PII or PCI onto this unmanaged device. So that cloud access security broker really gives you that ability to extend your DLP and your compliance controls to all of these cloud applications and third-party management systems that are out there. The last pillar, or the last piece of this pillar, is our secure collaboration system, and that comes from our Digital Guardian secure collaboration components. This gives you the ability to extend your controls over sensitive data even once it's left your environment. So it gives you a clawback mechanism. Maybe you're worried that a previously trusted employee has just resigned and they've potentially taken tens of thousands of sensitive business documents with them to go and work for a competitor. Well, with our secure collaboration solution, we don't just wrap AES 256 encryption around the file, we also wrap an access control list and a permission list around that file. So when somebody resigns from the company, our security team can go into the Digital Guardian secure collaboration solution, and with a couple of clicks, they can revoke all of their access to the sensitive files that they've previously had access to. So even though they've still physically got access to the data, they won't be able to open the file and do anything with that. You might be concerned about third-party risks. So you maybe have to share your customer details with one of your business partners, like a telemarketing agency, but you're concerned that their systems might become compromised, an attacker might steal their data. Well, again, with secure collaboration, you can make sure that the appropriate people within that organization have access to the information. But if they were to forward that on to somebody else, or if an attacker were to access their systems and steal the data, then they simply will not be able to do anything with that data itself. So that is a ridiculously high level overview of where a number of the Fortra solutions can assist with implementing this zero trust security framework. And you can see here that where each one of those different products can map onto those 5 pillars. But honestly, we can spend an hour talking about each one of these solutions within each one of those pillars within there. But really at a very high level, you've seen how that host of Fortress solutions can allow organizations to implement this zero trust security framework, to allow them to mitigate material cybersecurity risks by deploying this comprehensive but efficient set of security controls that will allow them to mitigate the risks of breaches, their potential business impact, but also ensure that the organization can maintain the agility that it needs in order to allow them to carry on innovating. It allows you to demonstrate your security posture and your compliance, both to the internal executive teams, to your auditors and your customers, but ensure that you're minimizing the costs that are associated with this, and you can reduce the overall operational costs by consolidating down on your single vendor with Fortra to have this single point of management around a number of solutions within the environment, and you can take advantage of the interactions between those solutions to reduce the manual workflows within there, to really ensure that you're getting the best out of your internal security and compliance teams and your IT teams, so that you're mitigating the risks but without pushing up the operational overhead. So I think I have ticked off all the questions as I've run through this session. If you do have any additional questions, then please drop me an email, nick, N-I-C-K, .hog, H-O-G-G, fortra.com if you want any additional questions answered. If you would like to talk to any of our account execs about your individual sets of requirements or see a demonstration of any of the solutions, drop an email through to info@fortra.com. And with that, I will thank you very much for your time. As you have seen, Fortress solutions can be used as an integral part of your zero trust strategy to prevent malware from entering your network, give remote workers more protection without unduly impacting their productivity, simplify the management of security operations centers with enhanced automation, and extend visibility into potential threats so that you can ensure that they're remediated both quickly and efficiently. With that, thank you very much for your time and enjoy the rest of your day.